So I think we have a great group. Welcome everybody. For those of you that have just joined, I'm Shweta, the co-founder of Earth Warriors. I'm really excited to have you all here today. I am going to dive straight into it because we don't have a lot of time, and I'm going to go through the members of our roundtable really quickly to ask them to just introduce themselves briefly before we get started. So Sophie, could we start with you?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Sophie Vellacott. I'm the head of primary at ARC Burlington Danes. I started this role in May 2020 in the middle of a pandemic. And previously to that, I was based on a team in South Africa, Cape Town, South Africa, working to improve the quality of education in township schools and in small multi-academy trusts, but they call them school operating partners over there. That was with EPG, Education Partnership Group. And prior to that, I was a teacher, which is a job that is very close to my heart still. And it's my favorite day whenever I'm in the classroom.
Thanks, Sophie. Really happy to have you here. Alison, would you like to go next?
Sure, thanks, Shweta. So I'm Alison Kitson. I work at University College London, and we've just launched a Centre for Climate Change and Sustainability Education, which has as its mission to support all teachers across primary and secondary in the UK, but also beyond. It'll all be freely available on our website. And so a lot of the questions we're going to talk about this morning are questions that we're very much wrestling with in the centre and is part of our core mission. So thank you, Shweta, for inviting me.
Lovely to have you here, Alison. I'm really excited about this centre, like we discussed earlier. Margareta, could we have you introduce yourself next?
Hello, everyone. My name is Margareta Vicescu, and I'm a climate change officer for the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea Council. I've been working in the past 6 years trying to support schools in embedding climate change and sustainability into their curriculum. So I'm very excited to be here today with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Margareta. Rasil, would you like to go next?
Sure, it's lovely to be here. I'm Rasila Arora. I'm 18 and from Delhi in India. I lead our youth community at Climate Science, which is a UK-based NGO, but we have our footprint in countries across the world to bring climate education that is not only accurate and actionable, but also accessible and fun. And motivates young people to get excited to solve climate change and integrate it into not only what they're learning in school, but also what they do in their careers. So yeah, we're lucky to have a youth community. I see Arunima here, who actually leads our community in one of our states in India. So it's great to have you here in the form of clubs, events, campaigns, and so forth. So yeah, that's a bit about me.
Thanks, Rasil. Jen?
Alta Morano-Smith. I'm a primary school teacher and educator. I have a master's in transformational leadership, and I'm also a trustee and coordinator at a small charity called Human Scale Education. And we believe in putting relationships at the heart of education and support schools to do that, particularly relationships with the self, with our true authentic self, with the community and with the environment. So those are the three strands that we work on. And I'm at the moment a founder and educator at Little Forest, which is a small human scale learning community in Horsham in south of England. And yeah, just views expressed today are my own. Oh, and sorry, just to mention, I did also work on the Earth Warriors curriculum, helped to co-author that. So yeah, really excited to be here today.
Thanks, Jen. And last but not the least, Annabelle.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Annabelle Hill. I am working with Sophie at ARC Burlington Danes as one of her associate assistant head teachers. I am also a class teacher. We piloted the Earth Warrior program about 2 years ago in our year 3 and reception classes, and we're going to roll out to all year groups this coming September. And I also contributed a little bit to the Key Stage 2 Earth Warriors curriculum.
Amazing. Thank you, everyone. And just to our audience, before I get started, I wanted to say this is very much an open, interactive session. We want this to be a conversation. So as you go along, just if you have any questions, just put them in the chat, and I'll try and address them either in the middle of the conversation or at the end. So please do keep participating. We'd love to hear your thoughts. So I think the first big question that we have over here is that we know that there are challenges to implementing climate change and sustainability education in schools at the moment. And what I'd love to unpack here is what are some of those challenges that are faced? And maybe to get this question started, we can hear from one of the schools or teachers themselves. So Jen, would you like to get started with what you think some of the challenges are?
Yeah, okay. So I think in schools that everybody's very focused and on really attainment and assessment and ensuring that they're delivering the performance that they're expected, because it's a competitive system in the way that it's been designed. So I think that leaders are focused on this at every level, and it sort of trickles down to teachers, so that teachers are also feeling an expectation and a pressure to deliver certain results for the children. And in primary, it often is focused on reading, writing and maths. So I think that things that are not directly contributing towards those goals can have a tendency to be pushed out. Now, there are schools that have really good practice and a broader value a breadth of curriculum and value the the well-being of children as well. But I think this is the way that the system is currently being designed. It's a system design issue to do with assessment and attainment. It's not the fault of any individual teachers or leaders, even in particular. It's more of a sort of a national policy issue. And I think I've directly experienced this. So within the school that I worked in, large multi-academy trust, the head teacher and the executive heads within the trust, in theory, were very on board with teaching climate education, but particularly following COVID and the need for COVID recovery and the focus on children's mental health and well-being, they did not want to put anything else on children and felt that it was just too much. So whilst in theory they were supportive, they really went back to focusing on those core reading, writing, maths, COVID recovery. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, actually. Two great points. I really like that you mentioned that there's actually a system design issue, just in terms of, all of the other pressure that's there on schools. And then also, for example, school leadership being very supportive in theory, but then not practically. And I think I'll pause that one for our next question. But I'd love to delve a bit more into the system design issue. Would anyone else from the roundtable like to, add to or respond to Jen's point on that?
I can, Shweta. I think, yes, the piece around juggling priorities is always going to be an issue, and that can be solved at a number of levels through the system. I suppose schools themselves are systems, and Jen spoke about a really supportive school leader, which is one element of the change cycle, I suppose, of needing to shift the focus, not necessarily away, but to balance out those priorities a little bit more. We also work for a huge multi-academy trust, and in our case, it's
please mute yourself, whoever that is. I don't know, it could be Sangeeta or it could be Sanchita. I'm so sorry. You're the only two.
Right, cool. So yeah, what I'm saying, at every level of the change. Shall I wait, Shweta? Perfect. At every level of that chain, we need system change. So schools individually, the multi-academy trusts, we're really lucky that ARC have put it as one of their priorities. It's called ARC Goes Green, and they're working on fleshing that out. But to have a system level change to influence our schools to change individually, I think is really helpful. And then ultimately, the DFE need to acknowledge these ever-changing priorities and acknowledge that they need to change it at a policy or a curriculum level in order to allow schools to have the space and the flexibility to make those changes that they want to make, and are supported by their teachers. The other thing I wondered whether it comes to this question is the concept of, should it be a separate subject or should it be part of every other subject that we teach? And I think that's an interesting question. I don't know whether it's one that comes under this question of what's the challenge, or whether it's about how we can address that as school leaders or as teachers themselves. And also it's sometimes scary. It's been controversial in the past to talk about climate change. Teachers have been encouraged to not be as political as possibly they would want to be. And there are controversial topics that we are talking to children about. And I know that brings anxiety possibly to teachers, as it does to parents actually. And we have a number of parents who sometimes question what we talk about with the children when we breach potentially controversial issues. So I suppose that's another one that's a staff training piece, or should there be specialist teachers that teach it? It's also just a huge topic that we're talking about. We're talking about climate change and sustainability as it links to everything. And the breadth of that can make it complex.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think especially that piece about, especially teachers not being asked to talk about it so many times, to not be political, parents being anxious about how you're actually teaching this to kids. I think, really important challenges there. Margareta, I was wondering, would you like to respond? Are these some of the challenges that you've seen in your role at the council? Because you work directly with schools on trying to incorporate climate change within their teaching system.
So my view is that climate change education obviously plays a very important part in pushing for a climate just transition. But my experience from visiting schools and trying to work with them is that climate change as a subject is presented more from a scientific point of view rather than actually going into the practical bits. I think we should be empowering pupils and teachers to become agents of change, to not feel powerless in the face of the climate crisis, but actually to know how they can take action and do things that can actually help with tackling climate change. And I also feel that climate change currently into the curriculum, and I'm not a teacher, so I apologize if I'm wrong, it's only mentioned in certain subjects, which would be like physics, geography, but it should go, it's a much broader subject than just limiting to the scientific bit. It should go into arts, into history, food technology. It should be linked to all the areas in the curriculum. And this is just my view.
Oh, thank you, Margareta. I think that goes back to the point that Sophie made, which I think comes to our next question of discussion is, how should climate education be incorporated, whether as a separate curriculum or as a separate subject or something that's incorporated in all subjects? Alison, would you like to, contribute to any of this?
Yes, certainly. I think this is it's a good question, and certainly from a UCL perspective, we're very much seeing this as a cross-curricular issue, because the challenges of climate change and sustainability affect all dimensions of our lives. And for me, this is about adding in a lens through which we see the world, right? And every aspect of the world, whether it be where we live, or our past, or how we prepare our food, or the literature that we read. It is a lens. It's not the only lens, but it's a lens. And for that reason, I think it really should be embedded across the curriculum. Of course, what we don't want is for kids to say, not another lesson about climate change and sustainability. So we've got to be really careful how we do this. And I think one of the challenges for schools is to decide what is meant by climate change and sustainability education. You know, what's in and what's not in, what does it encompass? I suspect that schools, and my background is primarily secondary, but I do have a son at primary school. You know, I think in both contexts, it seems to me that schools are perhaps doing a little bit more than they think. But what kids are not necessarily doing is connecting up those things. So, you know, my son, for example, spent a lot of time last year working out how a plant grows, and then the stages of that. He also was you know, being encouraged to tell us to switch off the lights at home. I don't think there's any sense in which he connected those two things. But actually, if we're thinking broadly about the environment and about nature and about human beings' interaction with the rest of the natural world, then those two things are linked. And there's a school that I think it's in Japan, where they actually set aside some time on a you know, I don't know, fairly regular basis. And the point of that time, an hour or whatever it is to get kids to think about what have they been doing across the curriculum, which contributes to our understanding of the environment, of climate change, of sustainability. And I think that's a really good idea, because I think we struggle sometimes to connect, you know, what has plastic waste got to do with global warming, for example? You know, how do these things connect? And I think we could do a better job at helping kids to connect those things up.
That's a great point, because I feel there's a lot of things. It's in a way, I feel it's not like environmental issues aren't already being taught in schools, but it's done in a way where I think it is hard to connect the dots. That's such a great point, because yeah, for example, plastic waste and carbon emissions, it takes a bit of thinking to understand where the linkages are. And I think that's an important point to understand, is that it is being taught sometimes in some different ways, but perhaps just not as coherently and in an interconnected way as we need it to be. And Harsha, I have noted your question, and that's a great question. But before we get to that, I'm just going to let Rasil, who at 18 has obviously just about finished school. So would you have anything to add to this? Like, what are the, you know, what would you have wanted, or what was the main, because you're a climate activist yourself, what did you feel were the main challenges that you faced in school, you know, learning about these topics?
Sure. So I feel the main problem is that we treat climate change and caring for the environment as something that exists in isolation to all other topics. And I couldn't agree more that we need to be looking at it in a more interconnected and intersectional manner, where we create schools to be ecosystems that talk to students about how to make, you know, the world a better place. And climate change is definitely one of those things. So it wouldn't just stop at mentioning climate change in a class, because frankly, I think particularly after the pandemic, students' attention spans are also not what they used to be. So the point shouldn't end at, you know, just mentioning it. It should also be trying and integrating it in ways that are engaging. For example, at Climate Science, we work to build climate science clubs in schools. So what that helps with is, if they hear climate change or environment in their curriculum, they're able to connect it with something that they're involved with in a hands-on manner. So whether it's something like a club in school, or whether it's something as basic as talking about climate issues in connection with their school. For example, one of our clubs based in California worked to make their school carbon neutral, or work to reduce the emissions and the carbon footprint from their school itself. So they were able to connect something that they learned in the curriculum, perhaps in a fairly limited manner, to something that they actually would like to work on. So I think what's really important is for us to lose this fierce loyalty we have towards an education system that has existed, and frankly, you know, a lot of the relevance of it expired over time, to think of this less as something that, you know, we have a school that processes students. They now know, you know, reading, writing, and arithmetic, and then they go on to higher education, and more to empower them to learn more about the world around them, so they can help contribute to problems like this. And I think, personally speaking, I heard the words climate change and environment a lot, but I only got activated on it when I joined Climate Science, because it felt like a way to actively contribute to something, as opposed to sort of accepting the eventuality of a big problem that students can't really control. So I really think it's about integrating climate education, not just as we have accepted education in the past and frankly the present, which is here's the textbook, learn the textbook, at least in India, to a large extent, and give the exam, and more about climate education in the form of learning, and that happens both through reading but also through practical hands-on things. Our school had a plastic ban since ever since I had started, so I was sort of conscious of, okay, plastic is probably not good if we have a plastic ban, and why is it not good? But yeah, and lastly, one thing that I'd like to add is that when we have students that join our climate science community, I have a call with them, and I always ask them, what do you think would solve climate change? And frankly speaking, a very, very small percent even mention energy or clean energy or non-renewable energy. There's so much of a focus on deforestation and plastic. And although those are problems of extreme importance, I feel we also look at climate change and environment for sort of the parts of it that are easier to explain to kids. But we should realize, and as someone that just got out of school, we can digest what energy is. I mean, if we can learn physics, we can certainly digest and connect that to clean energy. So I think it's about ripping off the Band-Aid and actually, accepting that there's a lot more to this than just textbooks.
Thanks so much, Rasil. I think what you've said and what Margareta said as well about, giving kids positive solutions. And I think that's something that's really key, because I think the focus has to be not on making anyone scared. And I think educators do have to move away from that fear of scaring kids and actually focus on more of the empowering practical solutions. So there's a positive hope element to it, which I think is something that, everyone needs. And I think we've seen enough in evidence from around the world that it doesn't matter what your age is to make a difference. I think when it comes to the climate movement, it is the youngest voices that have made the most impact. And, us as a generation have a lot to learn from that. But that actually takes me really nicely to our next question. And I think the next question was meant to be, how do schools fit climate and sustainability education into an already packed curriculum? And we've touched on bits of this. So should it be a standalone subject? Should it be part of every subject? And we have a question here from Harsha that says, can I ask if anything has been sacrificed from the fact that ARC have put in place the ARC Goes Green idea? So I was thinking for this question, Sophie, since you have successfully implemented Earth Warriors, which is a climate change curriculum in ARC Burlington Hills, perhaps you could take Harsha's question and also explain your experience so far.
Yeah, absolutely. We haven't answered the question of whether it should be a separate subject or integrated into everything. So that's the first thing to say, is that I don't have the solution. I have what we've tried, and we've actually straddled that completely. So we've redesigned our curriculum. This is the curriculum journey. It's on the website if you want to look at it in more detail. And what that maps out is our core foundation subjects, and also our core subjects in terms of reading, writing and maths, because they are still priorities to us. And you see a more formal element of climate change and sustainability coming through a number of topics. And we've broadened it away from just being science. So you'll see Year 6 geography unit called Global Challenges, which is they've studied in the autumn term, which is a fantastic unit, really sort of going head on to some of the difficulties that are faced, as opposed to just shoving them into science quietly. We also have a Year 6 unit called Making Our Mark, which is a history unit that talks about activism, not necessarily just climate change, but a fantastic model of how young people and other people have changed the world in the past. We have Amazon units in Year 4, for geography, a mini greenhouses unit in DT, where they design a tiny greenhouse, and all of that sort of stuff has been bringing in the language and the vocabulary, as well as the why is this important piece. And I know that Rasil earlier was talking about food being I think it was Rasil talking about food earlier being a really key thing, and energy, and so that comes into that. Then we've got plants units, as you spoke about with your son earlier, zones and biomes in Year 3, a geography unit. They Made a Difference is another activism unit that's in Year 2 about people who've changed the world. Habitats in Science, seasons in year one and how they are changing, and also all of our early years outdoor area are set up to include this. So those are the times where it is formally in the timetable, disguised in other subjects. But this piece around interconnectedness has been a real struggle for us. Those are isolated units still that tackle certain elements of the climate change and sustainability curriculum, I suppose. We launched Earth Warriors very early on, I think. I think we were probably the first school, and we launched it in reception. So our youngest children, they are 4 and turning 5, and we launched it in year 3, so 7 and 8 year olds really. They were 2 places we had capacity to launch them because of the teachers that were there. We've got to be really honest, like not everybody can do this straight from the beginning. And so we made a leadership decision to pilot it where teachers had the capacity, the opportunity, and actually the motivation as well to do it themselves. We found that the Earth Warriors sessions, I think we did 40 minutes a week to start with. I'm looking at Annabelle because she was one of the ones who taught it. 40 minutes a week to start with in those 2 year groups. And we found that that was a helpful vehicle to pull together all this other stuff that we were doing so that they could see how it fit together. They absolutely love the characters. I'll get them wrong. So I'm going to hand over to Annabelle in a moment so that she can talk more about Earth Warriors and how that's done the pulling together. But we also have other things running. So we have the Eco Committee running at the same time, who are the sort of change makers of the school. They sit partially on the school council, and they are the ones who are looking to make us more sustainable, kind of operationally, I suppose, but at a children's and student voice level. So I found for us that allocating the time to Earth Warriors, it wasn't that we had to chop something else out at all of our timetable, because a lot of the content is covered in other things, and this was the pulling together of everything and giving a language and a voice, I suppose, to the children through that process. The piece about Art Goes Green, yes, you can see we're using all of those topics that I read out earlier from Art Curriculum Plus, and so you can see they have shifted, I suppose, to not just teaching the tiny line in the science curriculum, but instead to tackling some of the issues head on. The other piece about Art Going Green is actually a premises one. Our estates are huge and schools are notoriously in old buildings that are not energy efficient, and that's a big change that they are trying to make. So part of the ARC looking to be more green, and that priority is from an operations and estates piece. And our teachers don't have much to do with that, and neither do the children, but it's more about the leaders making decisions to make their schools as efficient as possible. The other side is a shift on curriculum and making sure that we are not dodging the difficult topics, I suppose, and that we are equipping our teachers to tackle some really challenging issues. So I think if it's all right with Shweta, I'm going to pass to Annabelle, who can talk a little bit more about what it feels like as a teacher to balance some of those big topics that we teach in isolation with Earth Warriors, which we've used to bridge those and pull them all together.
Thank you, Sophie. So Sophie said I was piloting the Earth Warriors unit in year 3. And it gives a space to bridge all of that learning and bring it together. So that piece we're talking about interconnectedness, that is where it is happening in Earth Warriors. For example, we were doing biographies on Greta Thunberg and David Attenborough at the same time that we were doing a lesson, which was a timeline of our entire planet. And the children were able to say, oh, well, we learned that about David Attenborough found that really big egg, and we did a whole lesson about this egg, talking about Greta Thunberg and all of our points. We're able to link that. The children were able to bring their learning to life through Earth Warriors. There's some really great experiments in Earth Warriors. My favorite will always be Poe, who's one of the polar bears who's sitting on the ice. He experienced, unfortunately, his home is becoming melted. And it gave the children, this is in the early years that we did this, and it gave the children the opportunity to actually talk about, well, when it gets hot, the ice melts, and that means the polar bears don't have anywhere to live. And the enthusiasm through Earth Warriors and through the children's learning is really, really apparent. It's so hands-on. And there's a fabulous video, I don't know if Sophie, it's on the school website, and we've interviewed the children talking about Earth Warriors and what they've done. And I highly recommend seeing it. It is incredible to see 3 or 4 year olds talking about climate education.
Thanks, Annabelle. That is actually a really incredible video. That made me so happy. Actually, I will share it with everyone that's here today, perhaps on an email after the roundtable. Thank you guys for sharing your experience. And I'm glad to hear Earth Warriors helped pull it all together, but it is extremely challenging. And I love the fact that, you know, efforts are being made to teach it in different ways, but it needs that pulling together factor that we've discussed. Is there anyone else on the roundtable that would like to add to this?
Can I just say something, Shweta, to add?
Absolutely.
Yeah, one of the things which, you know, working together with Earth Warriors, we wanted to really make sure was strong in the curriculum was, yes, allowing children to explore some of the concepts and understanding and knowledge, but to use that knowledge and understand that that is power, knowledge is power, and that they can make change. So the community project was pretty much, you know, I think the most important part of it, because it's I think the key change that we need to make and bring in through climate education is for children to learn that they can design and create the world differently, and that this actually is a really exciting time to be alive, because so much change is coming and is already happening, and children are absolutely, as Shweta said before, absolutely a part of that, and they are the change makers. And I think Earth Warriors is a vehicle for that, alongside all the other great work that's done in schools.
Thanks, Jen. And I just want to quickly ask Margareta or Alison, do you have anything to add do either of you have any thoughts on how this can be integrated in general climate education into a really packed timetable, from the research you've done, from the conversations you've had with schools so far?
I also strongly believe that schools are severely under-resourced in terms of staff resources, and from my experience here visiting again schools and trying to even promote the Eco School scheme, for example, some of the schools have said that they would love to do it, but they have so much other stuff that they need to do that unless someone from the council like me takes initiative and kind of almost does everything ready for them just to put on, they won't be able to take it on. I feel there needs to be some kind of change in policy at, you know, like perhaps at local level, at national level, to enable, you know, climate change and environmental education to be, you know, propagated into the curriculum, so that teachers don't feel this kind of pressure that they have to either do it in their own free time or they have to stop doing something else to do it. This is my view on this.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. I think there is a lot of pressure that teachers feel. So I can completely, you know, understand that response that you were getting. And the point you made actually ties in really well into the next question, but Alison, was there something you wanted to add?
Only very quickly, Shweta, just to say that I think what Sophie and Annabelle are achieving sounds just phenomenal. But I think that, you know, what that school has is the backing of the leadership, both within the school and presumably across the Academy Trust. And that's what we're finding, that actually support and buy-in of school leaders is really critical. You can have a teacher in a school who, you know, this is a passion and they work really hard at it, but actually getting that embedded across the school really needs to come from school leaders. And so how we reach school leaders who are juggling so much, and actually get this embedded in the school ethos in a meaningful way, I think is a major challenge.
Absolutely. I've always said that I think at the moment, the schools that I have actually seen championing climate education and sustainability education are schools that have either passionate teachers or leaders. It has not, who are passionate about the topic and are willing to push it through, even in their spare time, a lot of the time, which they don't have very much of at all. So yeah, I think definitely there's some change in policy, incentive, structure that is needed. And I think we could then move into that discussion is in terms of the policy changes that we think would enable some of this pressure to be removed from schools, some space to be created in the school day, some incentives for school leadership. what do you think are the policy level changes that are required? Like, we know that the DFE, has set up a committee. There are conversations now about, there are many kind of working groups that are thinking about how to integrate this into the national curriculum. You have the natural history GCSE, but from a more practical perspective, or from your work experiences, what do you think some of the policy level changes that are needed to make this happen? I'm happy for anyone to go.
Do you want me to kick off on this, Shweta? I mean, I was thinking about this before we met this morning, and we've been talking to a lot of teachers, and clearly for a lot of teachers, primary and secondary, a message of you've got to do loads of extra stuff isn't really going down too well. So so I sort of see this in my head as 3 steps. Step 1 is, how do we work within the existing structures of policy? I don't think significant curriculum change is imminent. And so how do we fit this in a meaningful way within what we have? That's kind of step 1. And it's really good to see the DFE engaging with this more. And I think some of their ideas are really interesting, but I'm still wondering what actually is going to happen at the level of classrooms across the whole curriculum. So I still think there's some work to be done there, but within existing structures, the DFE has started to think about this. And I really want to see them step up and support organisations like Earth Warriors and like Climate Science and all these fantastic NGOs that are doing wonderful things. I want to see the DFE really supporting them. So that's kind of step 1. Step 2 for me is curriculum reform. And that means creating more time, really. That's the number 1 piece of feedback we're getting from teachers. There's just no time. So how do we create more time and build in a greater emphasis on climate change and sustainability education? But I think there's a 3rd step, and I think this is the one that all of us kind of, really, really want to see happen, which is we rethink the purpose of education. Now, I don't know how far down the road that is, but that's step 3 for me, isn't it? Come on, let's look at the world we're living in and the scale and range of challenges. How can we prepare our young people better for those challenges? A colleague of mine at UCL describes the curriculum as a fossil curriculum, and partly he calls it that because it's effectively been largely unchanged for a really long time, but also it's a curriculum that was embedded in a time when kind of fossil fuels were actually fine and were seen as a good, positive thing. The world has moved on from that, and the curriculum needs to move on from that, and that's about genuinely saying, what is our job as educators? I don't see that debate happening anytime soon, but for me that's step 3 that we need to keep pushing for.
Thanks, Alison. That was so well articulated, and I saw Rasil nodding emphatically when you said we need to rethink the purpose of education. So I'm going to bring her in here. Rasil, as a young activist yourself, and this was something you mentioned in your earlier response, what are the policy level changes that you'd like to see? And I know you're based in India, so the Indian context is fine as well. I think all education systems at the moment are going through this kind of overhaul, or this, they need to go through that purpose of rethinking what the focus should be. So would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure, and I agree. I couldn't agree more. I think just talking about this in the sense of climate education isolation is not as useful as talking about what we want education to be, and thus how we would like to see climate change in that context. First off, I do want to acknowledge something important, which is there are schools around the world doing incredible things, but I feel like those schools end up being in pockets of countries or contexts that can afford it. And frankly, I was privileged to go to a school in New Delhi that spoke about a lot of problems and social problems, perhaps not in the academic context as much as I would like, but in the context of I was able to start a gender equality club in school, and we had a vibrant environment club in school. So we were able to see student participation. I think that's an important point as well, which is, like was mentioned earlier, actual curriculum change is a far cry, and we can talk about it, but it's sort of sometimes ends up being in bubbles of people that really care. And unfortunately, most people and systems outside bubbles like those depend on systems that wouldn't allow the kind of change that we want. So I think what's important is also to acknowledge that this can come from students as well. And although, it's difficult to turn everything around, we can notice that when we teach climate change and the way that we encourage schools and to actually encourage their students to learn more about climate change is thinking about it not just as climate change to passively learn it, but climate leadership. Maybe start a climate club in your school. Start thinking about how, if your country allows it, many countries don't, start talking about your local representatives, about how you could have more climate friendly policies. Talk about climate innovation. A lot of, if we were to think about the current system that exists, there's definitely a fallback that unfortunately a lot of schools are having to change the way that they work to assign to the way universities do their application processes. You see so many more extracurricular things popping up of late because that's what universities are looking for at the end of the day. And so, if nothing else, we can make note of that, and we can think of this less as something that necessarily has to be jotted in, but more in the context of climate leadership and innovation and social impact. So if a curriculum can't be passed, which I hope in the near future it is, but if it can't be, then we need to think about alternatives, because I don't think we can sort of, that it's difficult to talk about climate change without it sounding like a doom and gloom narrative, but I think there's so much scope for it. When you learn about climate change, I think it's empowering. I think it allows students to come up with genuine solutions to it. And it stops feeling like something that exists in a bubble that only policymakers can make a change to, but something that, frankly, I was very scared of science in school. I did the clean energy course at Climate Science. That was my first time actually looking into anything that felt more scientific than what I did in the 10th grade. And it was empowering because it felt like, well, actually, maybe it isn't that hard. If I can understand why climate change exists, I could probably have gone back and done 11th and 12th physics all right. And so I think it's just about empowering students to know that this is something they can not only understand, but act on. And I went from not liking science in school to wanting to have a climate career. And I think that just takes not only teachers, but also students to take initiative and to start things in their school.
Thanks, Rasil. I think that was super inspiring and brings to home a really important point that young people need to be involved in the climate and policy dialogue. I think one of the real missing pieces has been that policymakers have not responded adequately enough to the voices of young people. And I think, there is so much scope to make that happen. And I couldn't agree more on the climate change education can be empowering. I think it's all about how it's taught. And I think anyone who knows me and has heard me talk about Earth Warriors, that is the USP of the approach. It's not just about teaching the science of it. It's about teaching the positive, empowering actions that can accompany it, which links back into what Jen said about it is an exciting time to be alive because there's so much change that you can make. And on that note, Jen, I see your hand is up, so please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring in a little bit of hope with a positive example around both curriculum change and also rethinking the purpose of education. And I think those of us that are in the UK, it's important to realise that England really is a bit of an outlier in that we haven't fundamentally looked at our curriculum and purpose of education. But just over the border in Wales, they're doing some really world-leading things there. And over the last 6 or so years, teachers themselves have completely redesigned the Welsh curriculum. There are 4 clear purposes for education, which are broad and include things like being a citizen of Wales and the wider world. And that kind of response, it's much more modern and fit for purpose. And it's focused on areas of learning and experience. So experiential learning is really important in this curriculum. It's cross-curricular, so I could go on for a long time, but it's really radically different from what we do in England. And that's come from leadership from the Welsh Secretary of State for Education, and but the process in being bottom up and involving teachers. And what they have now is so different that the next step for them is to rewrite their exams, because they've realized their GCSEs and things as they currently exist are just not fit for purpose anymore. So I think they're going towards more portfolio based assessment and things like that. But it's really exciting to see what Wales are doing. And I guess it could just be a change of government that might trip that same kind of change in England, possibly, hopefully. But, you know, across the world, I think countries are all facing these sort of challenges, but it is a fundamental relook at education that is what we need to do. I like the fossil curriculum. I think that's an accurate description of it.
Thanks, Jen. I think great point. Like I think comes back to the point that there is so much going on already, and rather than reinventing the wheel, there's so much we can learn from people that are already doing. And I think Wales is a great example. I've been reading about everything that, you know, teachers and school leaders are doing there, and it's phenomenal. So thank you for, you know, sharing that with us. And I know Margareta has her hand up as well. So Margareta, over to you.
I also believe that, you know, climate education material and environmental education material should be basically made in such a way that they are locally relevant. So rather than just teaching in the class about the topic, why don't we just do something to actually show the kids in the local area, you know, like, let's say they want to learn about solar panels. You know, we do a project where we take the children, they see a few buildings that have solar panels, and we explain all the benefits. And we also give them some tools to do their own research and investigation. So here in Kensington and Chelsea, we do an annual project called the Children's Environmental Parliament. We work with a local charity called Urban Wise London, and basically we involve 10 local schools, and each school chooses a local environmental issue that they go and they research with support from the council and also from other local organizations. At the end of the event, the children get to know basically about a local environmental issue, and also they come up with their own solutions on how they can tackle this issue, and they present it in front of over 100 guests, including councillors, you know, other schools. And then us as a council, we try to take some of their suggestions and put them in practice. This way it shows to the children that we're also listening to them. So I think kind of practical education rather than just theoretical in class really helps a lot.
Absolutely. Could not agree more. And that's one of the reasons, like Jen mentioned, I think so much of this teaching about climate change and sustainability should be activity based, and then also not just reading about it, you know, even in the way the pedagogical approach to teaching about it can be a lot more practical. And then also, of course, having this community element to it. And I think that really helps for students to feel empowered and, you know, put their learnings in action. And there's no other better way of doing it. And I hope you guys are also reading the chat. There's some really interesting experiences being shared. I think we have a question from a member of the audience. Has their hand up? Lucy? We can't hear you because you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can.
Sorry, my internet's not been great today, but I've really enjoyed listening in to all that. We're a school in Kenya who are also really focused on environmental awareness and appreciation. And I to chip in with that and just say I couldn't agree more about, you know, incorporating practical elements that enable the kids to appreciate the environment before they start to learn about all the many dismal challenges. I also wonder about just the term climate change. Couldn't we call it something more inspiring? Because I think as soon as you call it climate change, the implication is that it's going to be all about all the terrible things that are going on and that overwhelming amount of issues for young people. But I guess it depends, you know, at what stage the children are at. But that's something. So we're working on a program called the Natural Environment Appreciation Program, so NEAP for short, which will involve every term the kids going out out somewhere. You know, so whether that we're very lucky as in where we're situated, but there's no doubt that every school anywhere can go and visit and take part in something that is connected to the natural environment. So I think if schools, you know, if management can make sure that there's a day or half a day set aside for a trip that is solely focused on the kids getting out, learning something new, seeing something new, doing something new that helps them appreciate the environment, even if it's just a fun picnic in the forest or whatever, and that just to get them more engaged before they deal with all the darker issues associated with it.
Absolutely. That's another excellent point, actually. And it like you said, it obviously, like the whatever technical knowledge you'd like to impart to the students or teach students, it often obviously it needs to be age appropriate. But especially for kids in their younger years, it is very much just about building that bond with nature, building their love for nature, and like enjoying spending time outdoors. I'm not sure if the rest of you felt that way, but I feel like during the pandemic, I appreciated the outdoors way more than I did before, because the only thing I could do was go on like lots of long walks. And I actually wish I'd done more of that as a child. That was incorporated more in my school activities, for example. But, growing up in India, that wasn't the case. So yeah, really good points, and really, really awesome to hear that, Lucy, you're focusing on these issues in your school.
Well, and I just think it's a relatively easy change to make, and it doesn't involve a whole shift in the curriculum and getting everyone on board, and it's not that difficult to come up with a list of places that the kids can benefit from. And most people, especially the kids, would be very happy to have a break to their weekly schedule or their termly schedule and get out and do something new. So it might be a good one to start with for some people.
I was on mute. Absolutely. Relatively easy win, I would say. Okay, so we have 5 minutes left. I still have 2 questions, but rather than getting into all of the questions, I first want to ask members of our audience if they have any questions for the Roundtable members, or just any points that they'd like to share with us. I know some of you have been sharing it in the chat, but if any of you would like to speak and participate, otherwise I'll address our last question.
Hello.
Hi.
This is Harsha. Yeah. So I'm actually a friend of Shweta's from uni, and I only got to know about this whole thing because I follow her on Instagram. So I'm just a mum of 2, and one of my older daughter is in preschool, and she'll be going into the same school in reception for primary level. So I'm very keen to get something into my children's heads about climate change. However, it's I can see from listening to this roundtable talk how difficult it is to get that change to happen in schools, and I didn't appreciate how difficult that would be. And I'm so glad that I listened to this before I approached my daughter's school with any information. So going back to my question about, is it Art to Wellington Academy? Is that the one where they've actually done this before? Well, they're doing it now. You mentioned quite a few new modules that were put into your school's curriculum, which all sound amazing. I wish we could go to that school. But what were the children being taught before? What have those modules replaced? Is it just a natural evolution of the curriculum? Because that's basically what my school is going to say. We've already got a full curriculum. We're already doing loads of things, and they are doing things to do with sustainability. They've got a nice display up. They do take the children to local parks. They have activity weeks themed around climate change. But I can see that it is not integrated into the curriculum. It's all surface level. So I just wanted to ask, how do you pick and choose what to take out and what to put and in order to replace it with something like this?
Shweta, should I field that one? I think it isn't that we've taken anything out. It's more about the naming of things, I think, for us. So the national curriculum in England certainly is actually very, very vague in a good way. It asks us to talk about current issues and current affairs. We can then turn that into a making our mark unit or a global challenges unit. It doesn't, and if we take history, for example, and Annabelle will jump in, I'm sure, in a moment with science and geography, but if we take history, it asks you to teach an event that changed the future from the past, if that makes sense. So we're looking back in our school, we focus in on World War I and World War II as conflict that changed Europe and certainly the lives of people in England as the one that we choose to do, but the national curriculum does not mandate that. So it wasn't that we took anything out at all. It's instead that we've, as a network actually through Art Curriculum Plus, grouped things in a little bit more of a way that splits them up into smaller bite-sized pieces, but also means that we're coming back to the same topics again and again. So in early years, they have an objective. So this is the reception cohort. They have an objective on the early years assessment framework that's about the world, understanding the world around them. Great.
Right.
And that's always been there. What we've changed there is that that's not necessarily just my walk to school, but that's the opportunities to go to, we're right next to Wormwood Scrubs, which is wild parkland. So it's their opportunity to go there to see animals in their habitat instead of just the immediate place around their house and the immediate place around school. So all of those sort of things haven't replaced anything. We've just been a bit more broad in a way, I suppose, with our conversations, but also a little bit more targeted in that we are talking about issues a little bit more head on by grouping them under certain topics. The national curriculum in that sense, and I agree with everyone who spoke earlier about we're not going to get policy change necessarily at a curriculum level, certainly not imminently. I also don't think we necessarily need to wait for that. I don't think we have the time to wait for it, and I don't think it's something we need to wait for. Instead, I think it's let's read those words on the national curriculum and the guidance that they give us, the scientific skills or the topics that they want us to teach, and choose ones that we think are locally applicable to our children. So we're right next to Kensington and Chelsea, actually, in Hammersmith and Fulham, and we can choose ones that are relevant to us here, which makes the curriculum and the context much more relevant to our children. And then if they've given us a broad steer on things that we should topic, we can name them and group them a little more effectively. So in terms of your question of like how to steer a school to do that sort of stuff, there are resources out there. Lots of you quite enjoyed, I think, the topics that I've spoken about. Art Curriculum Plus is available to non-ARC schools, or it certainly will be from September. So a lot of the resources are out there. We've used Earth Warriors in lessons, as you know. We haven't used it in our older children, and we're going to bring that in next year. I'm struggling to fit it in when the pressures of English and maths, even though I really want to, when the pressures of English and maths in our year sixes are so high. Year six is the end of primary. And so there are key assessments there. And the unit on global challenges this year, and Shweta, this is slightly answering your next question. The unit on global challenges really wobbled some of our children, because when you're talking about the challenges without the hope piece and the we can be the change makers, that makes children really worried. And you know, we spend so long as teachers and parents protecting children from the terrifying things that happen in the world. And now we're asking them to talk about it and to raise it in a slightly doom and gloom way. And I think we made a mistake this year at our school in not counteracting that module that can be quite difficult with a don't worry, you can make a difference, you can be the change makers. And if they'd had Earth Warriors in year six, I think that would have counteracted that. So next year, I can't fit it into the timetable, but the year sixes will have access, and fives will have access to an Earth Warriors club, which will be after school. Yes, they have to sign up to it, but I'm hopeful that in our vision we have that we want our children and young people to be the change makers of the future. And I think the title, even just the title of Earth Warriors, the fact that you can make a change, you can be the change in the warrior piece, I think will hopefully counteract that topic where we made a slight mistake this year.
Thank you. That's very much answered my question. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Harsha, and thanks, Sophie. And actually, that's one of the things that we found as well, that when I've spoken to lots of schools about Earth Warriors, what my general approach with schools has always been, implement this any way you like. As an after school club, whether you'd like to do it once a week for the entire year, whether I think some schools also have like a Fridays for Future, afternoon period that they keep. So lots of schools have fitted in there, or do it every day for a term, whatever way I think schools can fit it in. I think that's the way to approach it, as opposed to rigidly saying, you have to do this in this way, incorporate it into your timetable. I think that flexibility is key. And I'm really aware that we have just crossed, it's 11 o'clock now, and I know some people have to leave. So I just want to say there were still questions that I had for the members of our roundtable, which I haven't got to, but I think the engagement that I've seen today makes me think that we should have discussions like this more often. And potentially I'm thinking that in a few weeks' time, I might set up another roundtable, which looks much more at, what are the practical things we can do to help teachers bring this into classrooms, like what training and support is required, and also how to combat the climate anxiety piece, which is something I know we're all really concerned about, but we know can be tackled, especially when you hear, viewpoints from a young person like Rasil, and also from what I've seen with Earth Warriors over the last couple of years, like none of the students have felt anxious if you've made them feel empowered to begin with. So that can be the focus of the next roundtable, but just to say thank you everyone for joining us. I will share a recording of this session, and if any of you would like to stay in touch with each other, or have any more questions for our roundtable members, please feel free to email me and I will put you in touch. Brilliant. Okay, does anyone have anything to say to end? I'm happy to give the floor, or I can end the session for today. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Take care, stay in touch, and I will keep you posted about another roundtable soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shweta.
Thanks, Alison.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.